Hi, everybody. Jonathan Broadbent here, UnWoke Academy. And today we have joining us my new friend, Paul Mladjenovic. He is the author of Stock Investing for Dummies, which, of course, promptly led us into discussions about how to go unwoke and how to encourage people to avoid the woke far left wackadoodle managers by doing some of their own stock selections in companies that we've been tracking, etc. But from there, oh my gosh, Paul and I think we're kindred spirits. We've spent the last couple of weeks connecting on all sorts of things that we're working on, and just great simpatico. I am delighted to have Paul join us. And actually, just before I clicked record and began recording this session off air, Paul mentioned something else that we're going to bring up in this conversation, and that is AI investing for dummies, which I think Paul is also involved with. Paul, tell us about where you are, what you're doing, and how you got here.
Oh, well, thank you for asking, and I appreciate being on your program. Wow, for me, I don't know how far back you want to go. I came to America as a 4-year-old with my family in 1963, and I was part of the working poor in Hoboken, New Jersey during the 60s and 70s. Then I got married to my wonderful wife in 1993, and we would have gone, on a honeymoon in my former country, Yugoslavia, but at the time, between hyperinflation, economic collapse, and civil war, yeah, that ruins a good honeymoon. So we went to the Caribbean instead. But on the more current pursuits, obviously coming from a communist country, right now I just celebrated my 40th year of being a national public speaker, and I always introduced myself as my website is ravingcapitalist.com, and I say, why raving capitalist? I go, well, I was born in a communist country. That's how you become a raving capitalist. So for me, freedom and prosperity was always an important pursuit, both directly and indirectly with my professional pursuits as well. And so I've had the good fortune to be writing a number of books like Stock Investing for Dummies. And thank you for mentioning my current book, which will be out in a very near future, called AI Investing for Dummies. And I think that's an excellent tool for many folks in your audience so that they can be able to stay up on a number of things for their own individual pursuits. But in addition, I was a certified financial planner for 36 years. So, oh, look at that. You made us bigger. How cool is that? But
I like that setting better. I missed it on the setup.
exactly. So again, my biggest pursuits as a raving capitalist is help people build wealth, both in their passive wealth building and in their active wealth building. Passive wealth building means helping them with stocks and bonds and mutual funds and ETFs and all that other great stuff. I do many courses on that. And the second area is that, when people used to joke to me and said, Paul, I don't have money to invest, I go, well, you're in America. Launch your business in your part time. So for me, I've been the biggest advocate of people having a home based business, even as a part time pursuit, because that's, I think, just a great addition to their arsenal for wealth building and financial security. So these are among the things that I'm involved with. And hopefully in 2024, myself and yourself and many of the people we know can keep on prospering in spite of everything that the world is going to be tossing at us along the way.
And I expect there are going to be a lot of twists and turns and political grenades, if you will, thrown our way in 2024, considering the upcoming election.
Well, who knows what's percolating is in an atomic bomb fashion in the next 12 months. I pray good people don't get hurt with this, but it's better to be prepared for bad times that come, and if they don't come, then be glad you'll be prepared anyway. So I'm with you on that count.
Before I began recording this session, you and I had a little preparatory conversation, and you mentioned education and kids and kind of where children's heads are. And I think it was kind of in the context of capitalism versus communism, if I understood your comments correctly. Finish that thought, if you will.
Well, first of all, one thing on the clarification side, many people think that the struggle or conflict has been like right wing versus left wing. And for me, it's always been, hard left versus the rest of us. Because I try to tell people that conservatives, liberals, moderates, centrists, libertarians, Christians, atheists. These are all the non-left. I mean, it's a diversified group. We all have different ideas about how to make America better, how to make it prosper. And these are good disagreements. You know, I have no problem with conservatives, liberals, and all the rest. That's part of, I think, the success of America. But where people don't understand that what's reared their ugly head in recent years is what conservatives and liberals should understand, that their common enemy is the hard left ideologues, people who are labeling themselves as progressives, socialists, communists, that kind of thing, you know. And many people, I think when people get a chance, one of my favorite commentators in terms of politics and philosophy is Dennis Prager, and he did a video some years ago about the fundamental differences between liberals and leftists. I mean, liberals, they believe in free speech. They believe in, you know, their own various ways of, you know, helping America succeed, and so many other things. And we could all disagree to degrees, etc. But I know more and more people who are liberals, you know, have joined conservatives and being more fearful of what's been going on with the woke crowd, with the hard left, the people who believe ideology comes ahead of common sense. And these things are destructive. You know, people have to join in commonality. Otherwise, everything that we're, you know, looking to build, and I believe in live and let live. But these folks on the hard left, these ideological folks, you know, wanted, they were like seek and destroy. And I think people have to realize that if people don't, you know, come together and band together, and again teach people, yeah, you can have your views, but you can't be on a destructive ramp or approach, you know, especially if you're in power. And these things have caused a lot of things to start falling apart in recent years. So I think it's a great concern, and I think many people will find out when it's too late about this kind of stuff. I don't want America to be on the same path of destruction that's happened from my former country, Yugoslavia, and other countries that have been, you know, on the path of destruction, like Venezuela, North Korea, you know, Somalia. You know, I mean, so many good people, decent people with decent systems, seeing it get destroyed, and you're talking about increasing human suffering instead of human advancement. So people need to be more aware, and a lot of people today are not, including the young adults that are out there. Many of which I think are are more aggressive than ever, but more uninformed than ever. It's a scary combination. So anyway, I don't want to go too far. Continue, my friends.
Yeah, so two book recommendations I'm going to interject for you and for the listening audience. Both of them are amazing, perspective-changing books that I've read. One of them actually is Book on Tape. I am most of the way through it, but it's really long. It was actually I think it was 3 volumes originally released in China. That is a book called Tombstone, by a guy who grew up in communist China, very successful. He was made a journalist and then documented all the mayhem and destruction of the Communist Party during the rise of the Communist Party in China. And it focuses on the famine that killed, I believe, an estimated 38 million people. Another book is River in Darkness, which chronicles the life of somebody who escaped North Korea and came out and told the story of it. So there are a lot of stories out there, and I think it's telling to me that there are social media platforms and media as a whole that is blocking and muting stories like yours, that stories of people who have come out of Yugoslavia and North Korea, and people who have escaped the Communist Party in China and Cuba and Venezuela, who are really now effectively muted. But those are the voices that we, the people, really need to be hearing right now.
No, understood. The people who have experience on all these matters, who have an important message to share. I agree with you 100%. I can only hope that that changes for the better in the near future, my friends.
Yeah. So just to sort of, I guess, sort of encapsulate the purpose of our discussion and why I wanted to have a sit down with you and get it on video and be able to share what we're working on and our perspective and those areas where we're finding some simpatico and commonality. And that has everything to do with the wealth gap. So, on paper, you can write an article or publish something or see on the evening news discussion of what's referred to as the wealth gap. That's the distance in economic prosperity between the elite wealthy, if you will, and us regular people. And then yet there's a middle class. We have the most robust still, in spite of the far left, hard left. We still have a robust middle class in the United States, but that's shrinking and that wealth gap is growing. So we have all this talk now of it's not just politicians, but these uber wealthy conglomerate monopoly business owners who have billions of dollars in their family. And then we have all these people in a growing number in the US who are basically homeless. They're living in tents in various places. So as that wealth gap grows, people like Paul and myself continue to advocate for growing and expanding the middle class and giving opportunity for economic prosperity and growing small business. How we do that is really exciting. It's super enticing to be involved with in creating parallel economies and those sorts of things. But Paul is specifically writing books that are designed to help anyone in any circumstance get a start something and create the prospect of economic prosperity, as opposed to what the far left want, which is to become dependent on government. Right, Paul?
Yeah, very true. And a few things, if I may. Hopefully by early January, I'll be done with a mini program that I'm doing on poverty, what it is, what causes it, myths and truths about it. Because for me, I end up finding out some things in this world are problems and some things are symptoms. Like you just mentioned, the wealth gap. All righty. And I'm sure you're going to find people across the ideological spectrum who will say, yes, we've got to shrink it. And many times the difference is not, do you want to shrink it? The difference is, how do you go about shrinking it? For me, one thing I've come to learn about economics, et cetera, is that people have to understand, and forgive me on this if I may, I don't want to get technical on this one here, but I've come to learn over half a century of studying this, especially from where I came from and watching America and the rest of the globe. And this is why I'm eager to finish this program on poverty, because I want people to understand. Because if people understand, they'll make better choices for their own self and in places like the voting booth. So they understand what policies increase poverty and which ones decrease it. And we have to understand that the wealth gap is not a problem; it's a symptom. All right, like for example, I've heard people talk about, well, Paul, you need to use, say, socialism, or command economies to shrink the wealth gap, and that just doesn't happen. It's interesting. Like I came from a communist country, so for me, many people look at America and say, look at the income inequality in America, and I go, yeah, but that's nothing compared to the income inequality like in a communist country. In a communist country, 99% of the people are down here. There is no laddered amount like, low income, middle income, lower middle income, upper lower middle income. There isn't that kind of thing going on, because in a communist country, 99% of the people are at poor, subsistence level, and 1% is fabulously wealthy. We always hear about billionaires in America, but people forget that in communist countries, there are people who are effectively trillionaires. Although we track, like Fortune 500 and the Forbes 400. We track that. So we say, look at this person. He is fabulously wealthy with 10 billion. But you forget that in places like Venezuela, for example, a guy like Maduro, No one thinks about him being wealthy, but the point is, you don't have to have a bank account and trackable net worth to know your wealth, because if you have power, you basically own the whole damn country. What is the price on that? If you were going to put a assets and liabilities balance sheet kind of figure on that, what's the number on that? So to me, the most important for people to understand is consumption and production in a regular economy. What drives the wealth in an economy is production. And a lot of these countries, like communism and similar ideologies, the governments are engines of consumption. And plus, if you're a private citizen, you're too prosperous, they take that away from you. So that punishes production. I don't want to get into a long conversation about this, but the thing is that whenever I talk to people and break it down in these terms, you understand what policies harm and what policies benefit the general populace, which is what we all want. We want everyone to prosper. But prosperity in the country is based on production. And what unleashes production? When people are incentivized to produce, again, the profit system, then you'll find out that you have more prosperity and less poverty. The systems that you and I embrace, Jonathan, reduces overall poverty. Free market capitalism, and I emphasize free market, because there's some people talk about different kinds of capitalism, like crony capitalism and all the rest, and those are all warp the whole point of it. Free markets build wealth for as many people as possible. Free markets decrease poverty for as many people as possible. Whereas other forms of government, they tend to warp it. And if you have the opposite, which is a totalitarian government, you're talking about, a government being an engine of consumption, and they build their money not by producing, but by confiscating assets. So there is no incentive for the populace to grow, build, and become successful, because what they always do is, if I can't succeed, I will leave. This is why countries that are communist and all the rest, you see people trying to escape the country, and where do they go? Go to countries that have noticeable visual wealth, which tend to be the symptom of a free market and production. But anyway, I can talk your ear off all day, but forgive me. Continue, my friend.
So you bring up an interesting point about wealth and power and who has it, who holds it, and how it's represented and discussed. So I've heard many times from many different sources that really, when we talk about Elon Musk and Bill Gates and people like that, we talk about how wealthy they are, who's the wealthiest person on earth and all that. I've heard for many years, ever since before Maduro was a prison mate of Chavez, and before he came into power in Venezuela in a handoff, I've heard a lot of discussion about Vladimir Putin. And Putin is effectively, there's an argument to be made that for quite some time now, he's the wealthiest man on earth, because he really controls the oligarchs around him, and he has power over all of their money. So whatever might be represented on paper, I'm heading somewhere with this. Bear with me a second here. But whatever might be represented in billions in net worth for Vladimir Putin and his family, it's really a lot more than that, because at the wave of a wand or a pen, he could assume the assets of any one of the oligarchs, which means that they're under his thumb, which means, in effect, that all semblance of rule of law and social structures is off the table. So you really effectively have you have people who are above the law. What I'm after, and my reason for bringing in that component of wealth discussion, is the attractiveness to a certain type, a certain personality type of unlimited power, not just money, but power to influence other people's lives. And we're seeing a lot of that play out right now with World Health Organization and UN and those sorts of things. And so it occurs to me that more than just how much money do you have and can you put food on the table and is the prospect of your children being able to buy a home, is that a viable component of your children's futures, and move the conversation more into what I suspect these uber powerful, over wealthy people really seek, which is control over people's lives and for themselves to be above the law.
No, you're onto something here. I mean, this is why. I mean, when you talk about control, this is what I always say. I mean, I just think one of the most principal points is, live and let live. And but now there's so much being interfered with by people who are, of great power and affluence that are out there. I mean, right now when I hear there are, official means out there to try to remove things like nitrogen, from farming, because they're trying to, address in their mind what they believe is the risks of climate change. But as the co-founder of Greenpeace said, that if you have all these things occur to fight climate change, he mentioned that when you do that, you could easily extinguish half the human race, because you would cause famine if you don't allow things such as nitrogen, to be utilized. So this power to look for this vague benefit, where in the meanwhile you're causing tangible and concrete human suffering. People need to be alerted to this, sooner rather than later. Otherwise, they're going to see a lot of harm done to their families and to their loved ones and to their neighbors. We have to be more aware about this and be more self-reliant, self-sufficient, more empowered, versus all these forces that seem to be lining up for the wrong reasons, and that ultimately will do harm to, to what is good, in humanity at large.
Yeah, spectacular. Well put. And thank you for that. Those are enlightening comments to put things in perspective. So, getting back to kind of the roots of our conversations, and that is this far left, what I call woke, undue influence in the world of finance, the ESG push, for instance, and the drive toward CBDC, which stands for centralized banking digital currency, and the expectation that that's going to be attached to a social credit system. And then one other really nefarious bad piece that not everybody is aware of, and that is the corporate equity index. A corporate equity index is kind of the club with which corporations are they're beaten into submission and made to do things that are damaging to the corporation. I refer to corporate equity index as kind of like the corporate or business equivalent of a social credit system. So if the score falls, in other words, for a corporation, their financial circumstances can turn dire. That means that they're forced to do things like damage to their own brand, as we've seen with Target and Anheuser-Busch, which is the parent company of Bud Light, and Disney and places like it. So, Paul, you and I have had some conversations not just about what that stuff is and where it comes from, but also about building hopeful alternatives like funding small business development for patriot-owned businesses and those sorts of things. Tell us more about your perspective on that and what you're working on.
Well, I know for me, having built up my content over 40 years, I'm hoping now that, I've been setting up some studio facilities in my basement, and I have some joint ventures I'm doing with some companies. I'm hoping that my content will do very well during 2024. And the primary way I wanted to do well is through joint ventures with big and small organizations, so that that this could help them in terms of fundraising, because obviously we'll need to flesh that out in terms of alternatives. I mean, if there are these kind of means out there that might do harm to companies, then there should be means to help people, come out the other side, and prosper, as an alternative. And I know that you have some interest in these areas as well, my friends, as your audience, I'm sure, has come to know about this. So the more we can make people and organizations more empowered, financially stronger, a little bit more resilient, then people can get a little braver about speaking up, for their own sake and for their loved ones in these perilous times.
Yeah, and absolutely. And those are the kinds of things that really insulate people from potential harmful dangers of overreaching government. So when you start to look at some of the behaviors that we've seen, even throughout parts of Europe, Finland, um, Norway, Germany, kind of going after farmers for that perceived the concept of CO2, and even all the way into China, who during the course of the COVID fear was welding people into apartment buildings, and effectively, I believe, we're allowing them to just die off in some sort of warped objective of insulating parts of society and letting others die. Those are the kinds of decisions that an overpowerful government can make. And then later they can come back, like our government has to some extent, and just say, oh, well, whoops, we tried our best, but we made a bunch of mistakes and hundreds of millions of people died. Oops. So that developing that opportunity for economic development and giving small business a chance at the local level and seed funding business development, something that I'm keenly interested in. And Paul and our expectation is that we're going to be working together and collaborating on some of that stuff. And by the way, speaking of the content, we haven't formalized anything yet, but Paul and I are in discussions of me taking his library of content, which I've skimmed through the stuff, Paul. I haven't had a whole lot of chance yet to really deep dive. I plan to, but what I'm seeing looks spectacular. And so,
Well, you saw a partial list. I have. I'm trying to do a more formal document, like a catalog and a schedule for when I upgrade this and launch it. Hopefully, every month I'll be launching a new course that'll be updated for 2024 and beyond. But it's approximately 35 courses on investing, business, economics, and I hope that some of these things become either profit centers for the budding companies out there, or fundraising vehicles for the nonprofit organizations out there that are like-minded. So we'll see how it goes. I'm looking forward to making this fleshed out as soon as possible.
so there is likelihood that UnWoke will be listing that whole catalog, or at least portions of it, and making that available to you. So stay tuned on that front. And as things continue to grow and develop, and more books are released, you're on your 7th edition now, right? Of Stock
Yeah,
Investing
stock
for
investing
Dummies.
for dummies. Exactly. That's that. I'm starting to. I'm in the middle of writing it right now, or updating it, and that'll be probably available no later than the spring. Meanwhile, AI Investing for Dummies is actually scheduled to premiere for shipping March 19, 2024, which is my birthday. How cool is that? I didn't even ask for it. They gave it to me. How cool is that? You know what I mean? But
Wow.
so AI investing, and I think AI it will be a great tool. And the thing is, it's one of these like adapt or die kind of vehicles. I think that if small businesses and everyone we know embrace it, get it on your side, because if it's not on your side, I hate to see what side it is on, you know?
So I'm glad that came up, because one of the things I'd like to do is introduce you to Mike Carter, who's also been on this show. He was kind enough to join me for an interview and discussion. He is part of the Economic War Room, and one of the many things that they're involved with, in addition to transactional gold and silver, they're actually working on state level alternatives to combat CBDC, in short. But another thing that actually was recently teased out and is very interesting and compelling for me is an AI piece that they're working on, that is AI with a moral value system that isn't developed by and for the left. In other words, it weeds out that far left bent. So I don't know what that's going to look like, but it seems to me maybe that's an introduction that needs to be made and get you guys talking.
Well, I did put a web page at my site, which I'm going to put more resources on, a free web page on AI that I'm share with anybody. I mean, it talks about my book, but it gives them free videos on various platforms on like what's Chat GPT, how to use it, etc. So I'll be happy to email it to you later. You know, it's if that interests you and your audience or anybody else for that matter. You know, the more that we embrace it, the better off we'll be, probably. You know.
Well, I strongly emphasize proceeding with caution for you and anybody else. If you haven't seen it yet, I really encourage you to look up Robbie Starbuck and his interactions with ChatGPT. They are very revealing about the leanings of AI. Most of the talked about AI right now, it is when we talk about the what's the term you use, the hard left. Uh,
Yeah.
it appears to me like most of the AI that's out there that's really sort of front of mind and being talked about is hard left. It's been developed by and encouraged by hard left. And we need to counter that because remember, a big part of really most all of the voice of UnWoke is to fight back against that stuff. So I don't mean to interject too heavily because I don't really know much about AI and what it represents, where it's heading. But I know just enough to encourage everybody to exercise caution.
Well, your skepticism is healthy and encouraged, and I can build on my own example. As I told you, communism destroyed my former country, Yugoslavia. All righty. So I'm very well aware of this. So, you know, I count myself an authority on the topic. So what did I do? You know, in the early days, I was writing the book AI Investing for Dummies. I went onto ChatGPT and I said, now keep in mind, what does communism produce? Tyranny, financial mismanagement, and so forth, right? So I went on to ChatGPT and I made the statement: communism destroyed Yugoslavia. And ChatGPT says, no, it didn't. Communism had nothing to do with Yugoslavia's collapse. What destroyed Yugoslavia was tyranny, financial mismanagement, and so forth. You know what I mean? And it's like they described the symptoms of communism, but they didn't want to ascribe it to the source, which was that kind of. So I'm very well aware about the drawbacks of ChatGPT. If it's a non-political, non-philosophical approach, you'll get a lot of use out of it, and you can be able to trust much of the responses. But if you're talking about things that have some controversy attached to it, or diverse opinions, you better compare it with multiple sources so you get a better, more well-rounded view of that particular topic. So yes, I'm with you, and yes, you should be skeptical. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we talk about parallel economy, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I'm not a tech guy. I'm leaving that to the real tech people who understand such things. I don't code anything. I don't do any of that stuff. I'm lucky if I can make the technology I have around me work. But I am hopeful that the real people who actually know technology, in addition to building parallel economy, build us some parallel AI. And it sounds like there's some people working on it because then as we're using it in some way, shape, or form for investing and managing financial decisions, I hope that it's not something that leans left. And I'm going to give an example, and I think this is probably one that's kind of in your wheelhouse, and I'm looking forward to your response to this. But we've seen through the years as the internet came on the scene and different sort of stock picking has evolved. We've worked ourselves into a very bizarre sort of dysfunctional relationship with our concept of the stock market and how we interact with it. A lot of people have just fallen into the expectation that pooled investments, things like mutual funds, are really just the way to go. But then there are other people who think that trading in the market is an opportunity for them to grow assets. And I think a lot of people think that maybe they want to grow assets fast. And there's all kinds of software out there that caters to that shows these sort of charts and patterns. You probably, if you watch any television at all, you've probably seen these commercials of these financial firms, and they show these really amazing looking charts. Usually they're people at a home computer or something, and they've got an array of monitors. I shouldn't joke because I actually have an array of monitors. Um, but it's like action packed, and they're like these charts, and it makes it look like their software is going to give you this leg up and allow you to trade in ways that's going to give you an advantage, and maybe you can make more money. Connected to that, when we now include AI, my fear and suspicion is that a lot of that stuff has been developed, cultivated, rolled out, and administered by left-leaning organizations, which has led to a funneling and funding of leftist companies and causes. And so, not to put too fine a point on it or spend too much time on AI, but that all of that technology is a fear that I have. What do you think?
Right. Well, what they say about technology, just like when they invented fire, or anything else for that matter. In the right hands, it's a huge good, and in the wrong hands, it's a destroyer. So this is something to be obviously watchful for. Now, in terms of what people need to consider in their investing approach, for me, um, I'm not going to, in a stock market being what it is, and you're right, there are going to be, influences and ideological, initiatives there. That's so true. I just think that what I would tell your audience is, if you're going to be in the stock market, just beckon back to the basics. Like, for example, my longest running course is called the $50 Wealth Builder. And what I tell my students is that the cornerstone or the foundational part of their portfolio, be it stocks, ETFs, or mutual funds, is remember two words: human need. Okay, human need. Right. In other words, you don't have to be a Wall Street analyst, or Warren Buffett's sidekick. Just to understand this. If you understand supply and demand, you understand how to look at a basic company and say, is it profitable? You'll look at a balance sheet and say, are they drowning in debt or not? There are a lot of fundamentals you can take a look at that worked 100 years ago. It'll probably work 100 years from now. But your audience, take that approach with the fundamentals. Think about human need, and your investing will be a lot safer, regardless of all the machinations they're throwing at you for the time being. Does that mean there aren't going to be problems out there? I go, well, human-run systems are going to have problems, and especially when you start to do what we're seeing now. I mean, I don't know what 2024 is going to look like, but I've heard half of my resources say there could be the greatest bear market, in modern history. Others say, well, it'll be propelled by technology and be pretty much good. So for me, I think if people are not sure, I think people have to ask themselves, if I'm answering this like not as Paul Mladjenovic, the guest, but Paul Mladjenovic, the financial educator. I have to ask yourself, what will people keep on spending their money on, no matter how good or how bad the economy is? If unemployment goes up or down, or people's debt goes up or down, what will people keep spending money on, regardless of what happens with the economy? If it goes more left or less left or whatever it's going to be. And to me, this is why I always say, think human need. All right, human need. And most human need plays, be they stocks or ETFs, they also tend to pay dividends. And I think everyone should have dividends. I always have my dividends plowed back in, because that's going to end up just accumulating the stock, so that I can have a greater income later when it's more necessary. But the human need, there's so much more I can tell you in this pursuit, so that no matter what the forces are that are of a dark bent or not, we still have to use our common sense and use things that have worked for a long time. Because in the event that dark times do come, much like with the Great Depression, ultimately, when people are faced with the basics, survival, putting food on the table, and so much more, that tends to bring back some sanity, which in turn helps to fight off the dark forces. Because sometimes, if people want something that badly, be it socialism or something, whatever, sometimes the worst case is give it to them, and nothing will wake them up more so than if they get a good hard dose of the very thing they think they want. So in the meanwhile, you and I and all the people that we care about, both in and out of business, need to just make sure we're diversified and doing all the things to, you know, get ourselves through what is going to be the bad storms that are on the horizon with all of this. And then when we get to the other side, hopefully that means that more and more people than ever before will not be woke, but be awakened. And so that we can get back on prosperous paths, in more enlightened times.
I'm really glad that fundamentals came up, and we're talking about stock selection and building stock portfolios. It's something that I've talked about a number of times in different sessions with UnWoke Academy, and that is getting back to the kind of what works. So we've known for many decades, our grandparents and parents, many just built stock portfolios. There are many benefits to that. One is you're not seeing that gradual siphoning off of ongoing management fees like you are with many types of pooled investments like mutual funds. Now, there is some complexity to that. Watch some prior episodes where I've talked about the different fee structures of pooled investments. That includes mutual funds, collective investment trusts, unit investment trusts, ETFs, all those kinds of things. I've talked about that in some prior episodes. But the thing with stock portfolios and building individual issues and knowing what you own in the UnWoke context, that instructs how and what you buy. So you can feel confident that that the portfolio, the sum of your portfolio, is not woke. That you're not going to fund these far left companies and causes. And Paul, I think that, man, I'd love to do a specific focused, dedicated session with you on stock selection and talking about fundamentals. Because when you talk about the things that have always worked, and this is actually a presentation I've spoken publicly for a couple of years now on this. When you look at analyzing a company and you're considering investing your money in it, there's a whole slate of things that people customarily look at, like the profitability, research and development, if they own patents, what their management team looks like, how their competitors, all those things that you might think of that are weighed and analyzed when you consider investing money in them. What's happened over the last 3 years is that stuff has been thrown on its ear and really effectively kind of thrown out the door in favor of this environmental, social, and governance DEI stuff that still does not have clear definition, which means that some people out there, and I think there are some bad actors in the marketplace, can artificially pick and choose winners and losers. And Paul, your background and expertise, your focus and training on stock selection is a direct hit and perfectly applicable to those conversations.
No, exactly right, and I think it's an important. And what's interesting? You mentioned about obviously in my class, I mentioned that the profit is the single most important feature of a company. Obviously, without profit, it couldn't exist. It couldn't employ people. It couldn't finance its future growth, etc. But then I tell them, because this is where stock investing could be, like the microeconomy. We're talking about individual, information about stocks, etc., and so forth. But I also open up the door a little bit to helping them understand the macro picture. I tell people profit isn't just the most important feature of a company. You could make the case that profit is the most important feature of an economy. I did a video when I saw there was a protest by some socialists, and they were carrying a sign, and I took a screenshot of it. They were going like, abolish profit was one of the signs, And I thought to myself, if I wanted to destroy, the economy as quickly as possible, and I can only do one thing, what would that be? I go, very simple. I will pass a law to abolish profit. All right, because what you're doing is you're abolishing the incentive to grow and produce. You're abolishing reward. And once you do that, then people will say, so why bother working? Especially if you're the government, you're going to take care of me. Okay, fine. Then you might as well take care of me. So if you incentivize everybody to not produce, to not work, to not seek gains, then everyone will just sit there and be idle, you know. And I got to tell you something, it's quite interesting. In my program on poverty, I decided to interview a few people who wrote books on poverty, and they might be good candidates for you in the future. But one of them is a professor out of I think Oklahoma State University, and his name is Per Byland, and he's active with the Mises Institute. And Per Byland, he did. I've been researching, studying poverty for years, but sometimes somebody will come across and say something so succinctly and in such an interesting way, you go, why didn't I think of that? And he did a tweet that said, what causes poverty? The answer, nothing. It's the original state. The real question is, what causes prosperity? Because it's true. Poverty, if you do nothing, you're going to be poor. You're going to starve. Prosperity, wealth, is an extension of you acting on this. So if you don't act, right? So in that statement, for me, I end up formulating that the people, why there's persistent poverty, as an example. I don't mean to take it in this direction, but it has to be a marriage between the macro and the micro. The micro means, the people of their own volition are acting, for their own pursuits, for the sake of prosperity for themselves, their loved ones, family, etc. But in addition, now some people tell me, but Paul, there's some parts of the world where these people want to prosper, but they're still not. And you find out that they happen to be in systems, the macro, where these are systems like socialism, communism, etc., which punishes productivity and rewards dependency and consumption. And the thing is, if you're in a country, where everybody wants stuff, that's consumption, but nobody's producing it because nobody's, and etc. Well, we call that poverty where I come from. If you want stuff but no one's producing it, you're poor. So people need to understand these dynamics so they can stop making these bad choices between bad companies, bad government agencies, bad politicians, etc. So we can get back to helping people prosper the way we should.
So I think I can substantiate your comment and also simultaneously refute any allegations of systemic racism in the United States. And that example is Nigeria. Nigeria makes your point. Nigeria has a tremendous education system. They have a spectacular family unit. It is very common to find two-parent households with parents who actually work for and care about their children, and they place high importance on academic excellence. And so they're graduating some really bright kids in Nigeria. But at the macro, like your point, at the macro level, there's no opportunity because it's an oppressive regime. So what's happening is, and not everybody knows this, but the single most, at least at last check, the single most successful immigrant community in the United States is Nigerian. So this whole Nigerians come here and they love it because it's just this great open free market society, or at least it has been until starting about 3 years ago when we started flirting with social communism, which is what I call it. But the successes are extraordinary. Great work ethic, great intelligence, just and really good foundation of having grown up in a society where it's really encouraged to have a two-parent and complete family unit. So that hopefully really illustrates your point. We're kind of coming up against it, Paul, but I do want to try and keep to our stated time commitment here, but my gosh, I could listen to you and your perspective and I just learn more about this roster of offerings that you have. I hope that you'll come back and join me again at some time in the future and talk more about these things and give us more feedback and perspective.
Well, I hope I get called back so we can continue helping people, learn more about prosperity and what it should be, because we want people to succeed. That's the whole point, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you stay tuned, my friends, tuning in to unwoke.academy. Paul has been kind enough to share some of his years of experience and let us know the status of some books. Stay tuned on those. Check out, do you have a website or anything you can point our listeners to?
Oh, ravencapitalist.com. And of
Yep.
course they can find me on Amazon or LinkedIn very easily. So they're welcome to come by. Thank you.
Raven
Raven,
Capitalist.
ravencapitalist.com.
Raven Capitalist.